All right, team. Well, welcome again to our September Masterclass. It's 27th of September. Incredible. We're almost at the end of the year again. Today's Masterclass, 90 minutes thereabouts, and we're going to be talking about how strategic is your thinking and decision-making. Now, we're going to go a little bit broader than that. In fact, we're going to look a little bit broader to strategic management as a whole, because thinking and decision-making are part of that strategic management. They're integral, they're the key parts. We're going to definitely go into those in detail, but I also want to give you the opportunity to really have a concrete grasp of what we're talking about when we talk about strategy management as a whole, not only the two elements of thinking and decision making. So that's where we're going to be. This is our third masterclass for this year. We have one more to come, which will be after Santa Claus has been. It'll be at the end of December. So the last week of December, we'll talk about that right at the end. But for now, today is all about strategy and strategic thinking and decision making, as you can see. So welcome. It's great to have you here. Let's have a look at the first thing I want to make sure that you received, and that is the ebook that is the companion to today's discussion. So as you can see on the screen, Strategic Leadership Essentials, Mastering Decision Making and Visionary Thinking. If you didn't receive it, it's not too late. You can see the link on the top of the screen, on the top right. You can go there, you can register and download that ebook again. Or if you prefer, you can send us an email at support@coachingforcompanies.com. support@coachingforcompanies.com. And we'll be more than happy to send through a copy for you. All right, so with that said, let's have a little bit of a think about why we're here today. Why is it so important that we're here talking about strategy at all? Most of you, if not all of you, are leaders. And part of your DNA needs to be understanding the importance that strategy plays in the role of successfully running an operation, whether that's a single team, whether that's a department, whether that's a complete function, or even the company. Strategy has a role to play. Now, if you look at the screen, here's a really interesting statistic. 25-year study. That's a long study. And during that period, they examined 750 companies that declared bankruptcy. And from their exploration of the cause, the number one primary reason that was identified is that the companies lacked or had bad strategy in place. Now that's quite extraordinary. That's a big sample pool. Across 25 years, quarter of a century, they looked at 750 companies that went bankrupt. And the number one cause they identified was that the organization had a bad strategy. So if you needed any more motivation than that, I hope that this has really got you tuned in and thinking. Now, if we look on the opposite side, of course, we can see that strategy has the positive impact. There's been countless surveys, studies, research conducted over the decades. And here's a survey that was conducted, I think, memory serves me correctly, 2018. And they interviewed a large pool of CEOs. And from that pool, 61% of all of those surveyed, all those CEOs surveyed, said that the reason for the high performance of the organization could be attributed to well-defined strategy priorities. So I'm not just here making this up, team. This is real. This is very important that you have a grasp of what it means to implement strategy and the components, the core components that sit under the umbrella of strategic management. So as we go through, that's what we're going to be talking about in more detail today in the remaining time. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a bit of framework to base the rest of our discussion on. So 750 bankruptcies identified the primary cause was bad strategy, and 61% of all the CEOs that were surveyed identified strategy as the core reason for success. So based on that, let's jump now into looking at the broader context, the strategic management. And of course, hopefully no surprise to anybody to see this slide on the screen. Purpose is one of the key elements that companies have and need to have clarity around. So it's the starting point, if you like. So if we would put this into some sort of linear, even though none of this is really operating in a linear format, if we were to try and put this and stack it in a linear fashion, the first thing we would say is we need to be clear on our purpose, that North Star, that guiding aim, our why. What's our reason for being as a company? We need to have that in place because the strategy is going to pull from that. Now, in addition to purpose, of course, we have these other three core pillars. I'm sure there's no surprise on the screen there for you. The vision, the values, the mission. Now, all of these things are different to strategy. Purpose is not strategy. Values are not strategy. Vision is not strategy. Mission is not strategy. All right. So please don't get confused. So if we were stacking these, we might say purpose and vision. We may say values and then mission. And then we would bring in strategy. Now, a lot of people will say we need to set our vision because that's the direction. And I don't disagree with that. However, what I believe and the approach that we take is that we say, yes, we set all these things as a starting point. But when we then come to do our strategic thinking, that is our opportunity to then go back and use that strategic thought as our means of refining and redefining, if you like, some of these things that you see on the screen. So the strategy is the how-to, of course, but it's also the pathway. And quite often when we're brainstorming or we're coming up with these very high-level indicators or roadmaps, we don't have a full picture of what it's going to take to get there. And as we start to work through strategy, that roadmap becomes clearer. And quite often, it validates or it identifies some of the challenges that we will encounter in reaching these visions and our mission and our purpose and living our values. So I refer to everything within organizational operations as being systemic. It's not linear. We try and make it simplified by talking about it in a linear fashion. We set purpose, we set vision, we come up with our values, we identify them, and then we talk about the mission and then develop the strategy. Yes, but they all work in partnership to each other. And in a systemic manner, one interacts with the other and therefore creates a ripple effect to all the existing other parts. So Hopefully that's somehow clear. So strategy is not at the bottom of this high-level food chain. Strategy is an element that either validates or helps us refine our thinking around vision in particular. So I'm hopeful that is somehow clear. Let's have a look at our agenda for today. Now that we've touched on the why and we've given you a couple of indicators about, excuse me, what we're going to be talking about. So here's a rough outline, and it's a guide. It's not going to be succinct to the point that I'm going to touch each individual word, but we start with strategic thinking. We're going to look at the foundation. We've already touched on that, looking at purpose, vision, mission, values, and this whole structure. But we're going to go a little bit deeper than that. We're going to talk as well about systemic thinking and what that really means and looks like. And we're going to then also talk about future forward. Once we do that, we then look at strategic thinking per se and understand the components of strategic thinking. So that's next up. Then, as you can look down the agenda, from there, we're going to look at the team that you need to have in place to really put your strategy. You have your strategic management team, if you like. And you'll see we talk about 4 specific functions of that team. We talk about the disruptors, the innovators, the creatives, and the catalysts. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. And then, of course, supporting our thinking and supporting the team is our analysis process. And so as we think through different scenarios, as we think through the different elements and the team, each function of the team need to have these tools and techniques that they can call on and leverage from to help really grasp and go deeper and make sure that they have absolute clarity and that they're going to be able to paint the picture and provide the direction as well as the alignment for the organization. So the analysis tools are extremely important because it helps us get into the depths of our thinking and really the structure and the framework that we need to develop. So we'll talk about the analysis. Then we'll have a quick break, 5-minute break, before we come back and then get into the second part, which is the strategic decision making. And again, you'll see that we talk about the components and the methodology. We look at the direction that it will help us show and illustrate to the organization. We talk about planning. Now, planning is a core element under this umbrella. All right, so I don't want to leave out planning, but we'll touch on that briefly. And then, of course, we'll talk about the techniques for decision making as well. Before we wrap up with the final major component of strategic management, which is the alignment. So this is quite often the area where a lot of leaders put in all the hard work to get to that final step, and then they fail to grab the attention of everybody in the organization. They fail to get the buy-in, if you like. They fail to ensure that all of the leaders, not only that senior team in the strategic team, but let's say the next level and the level after, and the whole organization, the whole workforce aligned on the execution of their day-to-day operation to make sure that it's part and parcel in the right direction to realize the strategy. Yeah? Now, that's often where it breaks down. So we want to make sure that we paint a clear picture of the importance of that for you before we finish off today. Okay, so with that said, let's dive into strategic thinking. And we're going to start by just introducing systemic thinking and this future forward concept. So I'm just going to have a quick drink. So if you've attended other masterclasses or some of our challenges or our virtual masterminds, there's a good chance you've heard me speak about systemic thinking. It's really at the core of everything that we propose as business consultants. It essentially is saying that the old adage of linear thinking is dead and buried. And systems or systemic thinking, slightly different, but close enough for intent and purposes today, really helps us to see the holistic nature. Now, when we're talking about strategy, this is so important. If we can't step back from the forest to see all of the trees, to see, as you can see here, it's called the six lens approach. And in this case, we're looking at the ecosystem. So if we look at this picture on the left side of the screen, where you or I standing in this ecosystem, and you can see that we look at the different levels or the different layers of interaction. So there's you, there's our interpersonal, there's the team, right? There's the broader operation, could be your department, could be the regional operation, could be another function within the organization, right? So there's many layers within your ecosystem. Now, they're all part of your stakeholder group, internal. But then we need to also look at our external stakeholders if we really want to have this holistic understanding of our business. And if we want to create a strategy that is going to be aligned with that ecosystem. Now, of course, we can continue to build out that ecosystem as far as you want to. However, one thing I would caution about is some people get lost in this process. They step back and they say, well, there's the whole world, and yes, we will have an impact sooner or later on the whole world, and we should be targeting that global perspective, etc., etc. Now, depending on your business and your operation, that may or may not be true, but instead of taking that aeroplane view where you're 30,000 feet above, looking down, a great book by a gentleman, I think Rick Horwath, wrote, called Elevate. He makes this comment. He says, if you're at 30,000 feet looking down, you're not going to see much because there's going to be a lot of cloud below you, perhaps, and you're not going to be able to see the detail. So when we talk about being holistic, make sure that you pull back far enough to see the expanse that you need to be seen, the ecosystem that you really want to build your strategy around. So it may be, in his analogy, he uses 1,000 feet rather than 30,000 feet, so that he can still think of it like a Google map, if you like. And you need to be able to zoom in far enough on the Google map, not necessarily to see the whole world, but to zoom in far enough to see your area of need, where you want to ensure that your strategy is covering, okay? But it's very important to be able to do this. Now, why systemic thinking or systems thinking is because we first of all pull back. We see that picture, that whole ecosystem that we're interested in, that we want to build our strategy to encompass. But we also see all of the different layers. So in the example on the screen there on that left side, we see that interpersonal, we see the team, we see the operation, we see the stakeholders, we see the wider ecosystem, right? And you can see the arrows saying that there's a connection between each one of those layers. So when something happens in one layer, it has the potential to create that ripple effect on each one of the other layers. And so it becomes this whole dynamic, this dichotomy that's constantly moving. If you think of a flock of birds that you see in the air, or the trevally, the school of trevally swimming in the ocean, and how they all move, and one moves and the rest move in harmony. That's essentially what we need to be able to see, and that's what systemic thinking enables us to do. So it's really important that when we're building strategy, that we're not so deep into it, into the operation, that we can't see the bigger picture. All right, so hopefully that gives you some clarity. So that's why we talk about systemic thinking. We want you to be able to see both the interplay between the parts and the bigger picture. All right, and therefore it's not linear. It's a circular, constantly evolving motion that we need to be conscious of. Now, the second element is that when we're talking strategy, and in particular, when we're talking strategic thinking, we need to be looking to that horizon as part of this strategic thinking. So it's not just thinking about the status quo. And the diagram on the right-hand side is from a theory called the three horizons theory. And you can see H1, H2, H3. So H1 is your current mode of operation, your status quo. H2 is where you look at the current status quo and you identify things that you can tweak over time to keep your strategy or your operation functional and performing, so that it doesn't become entirely outdated. Now that, as you can see on the screen, H1 and H2 eventually peak and then drop off. H3 is where we're really looking to that future. We're looking beyond the immediate to that horizon out there and trying to anticipate, trying to see the disruption that may be on the horizon and heading our way. And it gives us, by doing that, it gives us the opportunity to think strategically about what is our response. Now, when we get really good at this, and this is where great strategic thinkers come into their own, and you'll see I call these people the disruptors in our team when we come to this in a minute, but these are the people who are able to look to that future. They're able to strategize in their mind and put together a scenario and lead the business to reach that outcome. So they, in fact, become the disruptor rather than somebody who can see that disruption but is reacting to it in preparation for it to arrive. So obviously, if we were in a perfect world, it was utopia, we would be looking to that horizon. We would want to be creating and driving our industry towards that so that we're in the box seat. And that's what is possible through well-crafted, well-defined strategic thinking around the business and the direction that you want to go. So these two factors are super critical in the rest of what we talk about. So A, it's holistic, it's not linear, it's a constantly evolving dynamic that you live in, an ecosystem, and each of the parts have the potential to impact each of the other parts, which then changes that dynamic. All right, so you need to be able to see those parts. So if my team does something that has an impact on one of our external stakeholders, one of our clients, what's the outcome? And when we get good at doing this, it may seem like mission impossible to think through all those scenarios, but when you get good at doing it and you practice it and you become more efficient, then this becomes second nature. And this is how you start to think. and you can really have a dramatic impact on your company, on the future of the operation, and the success of the business. Hence the reason that people say strategy is so important. So let's have a little look at what is strategy, right? So again, borrowing from the book that's called Elevate, and it's written by Rich Horwath. He defines strategy as the intelligent allocation of limited resources, which makes sense, right? It's when we put together the strategy, we're looking at that future, we're looking at that ecosystem, but we also look inwardly at our company. And we know that we don't have unlimited resources. So how do we allocate our resources in an intelligent manner that allows us to really maximize the outcome from that limited source? And that's why being able to see it from a systemic level, being able to look the future forward at that horizon 3 becomes so important. So we don't waste a lot of resources doing the doing on the status quo, treading water while the world around us is changing, and we get all of a sudden caught out, disrupted, and then we don't have the ability to react quickly enough. We don't have the resources that can suddenly transfer us from that status quo to that future needed location. Yeah. And that in essence is why so many companies who have poor strategy end up bankrupt. Now, what we're trying to create, of course, through strategy is our uniqueness, our value proposition, if you like, that comes out of who we are and the activities we're doing that create our uniqueness, that help us work with our clients and help our clients want to work with us because of that uniqueness. All right. So imagine again, looking to that horizon, being the disruptor is much better because we can then guide our clients in a far better way than being the disrupted, where our focus is totally on treading water as fast as we can to be able to stay afloat, and we don't have the opportunity then with the limited resources we have to then leverage our uniqueness. And therefore our client centricity, our customer centricity, if you like, suffers. Right? And as you can imagine, our strategy helps us. If it's the right strategy, it's going to help us outperform our competitors, and it's going to help us serve our customer. But again, you can't do that if you're constantly in that disruption mode, where you're the one being disrupted and all you're trying to do is stay afloat and survive. Then outperforming your competitors is not really a thought process. It becomes, how do I keep up with them? How do I serve my customers? Well, I hope they like what we're doing, because all of our energy is going into being able to stay afloat, and we just hope that we've got it right for them. All right. That's not where you want to be, and that's what strategy is all about. It's about helping us move forward. It's about helping position us so that we can be in the box seat, in the driver's seat. All right. So hopefully that gives you a real nice framework to start from. Let's now look at strategic thinking per se as part of the strategic management umbrella. So you can see on the screen, on the left side of the screen, a very nice diagram. We created the diagram, but it's not our theory. The theory comes from a book called The 6 Disciplines of Strategic Thinking. It's quite a new book. I think it came out about middle of this year, 2004, about June 2004. It's written by a gentleman that you may well know from other books, particularly his first 90 Days book, Michael Watkins. Extremely gifted individual in terms of his ability to think strategically, in terms of his ability to put that into writing. So the 6 disciplines you can see in this diagram are his, and that's effectively summarizes very nicely what we mean when we talk about strategic thinking. So what is it we have to do when we're thinking strategically? What are some of the elements? Well, it hopefully is no surprise, we've already covered some of those in what we've introduced at the beginning here in this masterclass. So let's have a look at the ones we've already introduced. Visioning. So Horizon 3, looking future forward, tying it to our company vision, but being able to see that future, being able to look beyond at the trends, the disruptions, the possible elements that are going to affect our operation. All right. So to give you something more concrete, if anyone is out there listening to me talking here today, I sincerely hope that you are all paying attention to technology. All right. So that's no longer future, although it's both, right? So because it's continually evolving and it's rapidly evolving exponentially, we need to be constantly one eye on that, what the technology is likely to do to our business and how can we leverage it? How can we prepare for something that we don't have the capability or the resources or the understanding to influence? How can we prepare for that? And what areas could we leapfrog with technology to help bring us ahead of our competitors? So it can be friend or foe, and it could be both. So you really need, as a leader of any organization, you need to ensure that you have one eye on technology. Now, that's not the only thing you need to be looking at, but that's just one example for you. So that's visioning, all right? Now, with that, of course, you need to have that mental agility, that ability to be able to see that future and think through strategically about the impact that's coming, about the things that are going to happen as a consequence, and hopefully be able to say, I want to be ahead of the curve. So what can I do that will impact the direction in the future for our business? All right. Now you need to have that mental agility. So these are things we've already spoken about. Guess what else is on there? Systems thinking. We use the word systemic, systems, systemic, very similar, right? So we need to be able to pull back, see the big picture, but also understand the interplay of the parts to be able to then understand what is likely to be a consequence of that future. Yeah. What's the consequence of what's happening right now? If we try this, what's likely to happen? What's the ripple effect it will create? If we don't do anything, what's the impact it's going to have, etc. All right. So the systems thinking, seeing the whole picture, being able to see the interplay. And then 3 things that we haven't touched on so much just yet. So let's introduce those right now. The first is to be able to recognize patterns. So I've used the word trends. Now, trends are forward thinking, right? There may be a trend that's already occurred in the past, but if we're looking for a trend, it means it's either playing out at the moment. It may have already played out, but it's continual, and we're looking for what's going to happen in the future as a result of that trend at the moment. All right. So we could transfer that and talk about patterns. So what are we seeing in terms of our operation? What are we seeing in terms of our competitors? What are we seeing in terms of our clients? What are we seeing in terms of the industry? What are we seeing in terms of technology? What are we seeing in terms of the broader ecosystem? Social media, classic example. I've delivered training, been involved in sales most of my career. Now we talk about social selling, and it's gathering such momentum that it may or may not already be at that tipping point, but social selling is going to take over traditional selling means. So if you're not selling online, if you're not building your influence and building your community and serving your tribe and engaging with them and providing value online through social media, then there's a huge chance that you're going to get left behind. The wave is going to crest over you and you're going to be swirling around at the bottom of the ocean, because social media, social selling is one example of pattern recognition that people need to be able to see. So when we talk about strategic thinking, that would be one example. All right? If we talk about AI, probably most obvious one, and we look at how can we leverage that? What is the trend in my industry as a result of AI? What are my competitors doing to leverage AI? What is the industry as a whole talking about in relation to AI? Yeah. We look for the patterns, we understand the trend, we try and see the projection that it's creating to help us think strategically about the impact that it's going to have, the systemic impact. Now, most of what I've said, you could interpret positively. However, we all know that running a business is filled with challenges day on day. And therefore, we humans have learned over the eons to become problem solvers. And strategic thinking, no surprise, requires us to identify those problems, current and future, and be able to find solutions to them so that we prepare for them. We already have a solution ready that can be applied should it arise. And we'll talk more about this when we come to different analytical tools that help us identify those problems. Scenario planning is one of the classic ones that I like to use. So problem solving, very important that we are all very good problem solvers. It's foundational to being a strategic thinker. You're going to identify issues. You need to be able to think them through. You need to be able to come up with ways to work around them, workarounds, new processes, how to jump the competition potentially with your solutions. And then the one that I've left to last, political savvy. Now, it is what you may be thinking. It's your ability to look at all of the parts within that systemic landscape and understand that the strategy that we're coming up with may not be accepted by everybody. There may be pushback. There may be hidden agendas. There may be situations where people are really opposed to making the change if it requires change. All right. So as a strategic thinker, as a leader of any organization, you need to have that awareness and the ability to be able to see, identify, and then work with that challenge that may or may not exist. And we'll talk more to this point in the very last point with strategic alignment, because this is often where it shows up very heavily when we look for buy-in and we hear maybe for the first time the resistance that's really out there. So as we think strategically, there's 6 great disciplines for you to be aware of and to leverage to help with your strategic thinking. All right. So hopefully that's starting to create a little bit more clarity for you as we move forward. So if you took each one of those disciplines that Michael Watkins introduces, he's not the only person that talks about these, by the way. His is very succinct. The book I've mentioned a couple of times already, called Elevate, also talks about 3 of these areas, or maybe 3 or 4. Rich combines a couple of these. So these are not unique to Michael Watkins, but he's brought them to the table and made them very clear. And as you can see by my diagram there, strategic thinking as a concept is done in our mind. Now, we use tools and techniques, etc., to help us elaborate on it. But it's like playing that game of chess, right? It's thinking 5, 6, 10 steps ahead to what that future holds for us, and being able to be agile enough, to be adaptable enough, to be ready and planned for that future. Yeah. So if you're a great chess player, it doesn't mean as a result you're going to be a great strategic thinker, but the concept could be, there could be a correlation between the two. I'm not saying it's cause and effect. All right. So hopefully that gives you some clarity. If you want 6 things you can work on as a leader today to improve your strategic thinking, there's 6 disciplines that will definitely help you to become a much better strategic thinker. All right. So with that, let's now look and talk about the team that you should have in place within the organization, within the leadership group. Whoever is responsible, whatever way you have your organization structured, you need to have people in that organization who are responsible for strategic development, the strategic management. And as I mentioned earlier, I break it down into 4 functions within this group: the disruptors, the innovators, the creatives, and the catalysts. And so next up, what we'll do is we'll go into each one of those just to give you a broader picture of, very briefly, of course, the role that they play and how they build and work together in a systemic manner. Now, remember, this is not a linear process. Just because I'm going to show you first disruptor and then innovator and then creatives and then catalyst, it's not always going to work in that linear fashion. There's going to be this systemic nature. All right. So with that said, let's have a quick look. First up, disruptor. So who are our disruptors in our strategic team? Well, they're the ones that are focused on that future horizon. So if you remember earlier today, I introduced that 3 horizons diagram, the 3 lines on the graph. We want to be horizon 3, that H3 line, looking to the future, planning, identifying those trends that we spoke about, those patterns, anticipating what that future looks like, and then able to come back and talk about what they've identified, what they see as a future trend, what they see as potential disruption heading their way, what they think could be a disruptor that our organization can work on, how we can take the lead, how we can leapfrog our competitors and become the disruptor, not the disrupted. And that's why I call them the disruptors. So these are the people who, if you like, according to that picture, have their Meta glasses on or their Apple glasses on or whatever you want to refer to in today's sci-fi space, and they're seeing a different world to the status quo. and they're able to interpret that. They're able to anticipate the impact that that's going to cause and come back and plant the seed with the rest of the strategic team to help then prepare to either be the disruptor or prepare solutions to the challenges that are likely to come their way. All right? So the disruptor, extremely important function. Hopefully you can sense that. If you look at my Clifton strengths, my top 2 out of my top 5, I'm a strategist and a futurist. So yes, I would classify myself as a disruptor, good or bad, but yes. So if I'm in your team, that's the role that I typically will play. Not the only role that I could play, but would be my primary role. All right. So there's a way that you can actually look at your own team and say, gosh, I wonder who is our disruptor or our disruptors. And just a heads up, it's always better to have more than one. So depending on the size of your leadership team, let's say you have a smaller organization, you only have 2 or 3 people in that senior leadership team, then you're going to have to wear multiple hats. All right. But somebody needs to be the primary disruptor, and you may need a supporting person who plays that as their secondary role. Somebody will need to be the next person in that team who we call the innovator. Now, these are the people that the disruptor comes to with their observations, with what they've identified as the potential trends, the disruptions, the ideas, and they pass that over to the innovators. Now, the innovators are equally critical in this team, because what do? They say, well, thank you very much for that vision. How does that impact us? What can we do to play with this, experiment with this, and prepare for this? How do we come up with the solutions that we need to have ready? How do we come up with ideas that will help us become the disruptor? All right. So the innovator, equally important. So there's the first 2 in the team, right? Disruptor and innovator. But it doesn't stop there, because the innovator may not be the best at creating the plan. They may be great at coming up with innovative ideas. But when you have to pull those innovative ideas together into a comprehensive strategic plan, that's a whole other set of criteria. And this would be my second cap if I was in that team. So disruptor would be my first strength, my primary strength, but because I'm strategic in my mindset, then being the creative would be definitely my secondary strength. Right? So these are the people that they hear what the disruption is going to be. They engage with the innovators and the ideas that the innovators have come up with and tested and believe are the right solutions. And they take that and they craft that, they mold it into the strategy. Right? So these are your real strategic thinkers. These are the people that say, got it, now let's make it something that's tangible. So hopefully that makes sense. And as I'm sure you're starting to glean by now, it's very unusual that one individual is going to have all of these as their core strength. Now, we're just talking about strategic thinking at this moment. Well, we're now starting to digress a little bit into planning and decision making, but you start to get the picture, I hope. And then the final member of the team are those people that are going to be empowered to take that plan that the creatives have put together and to go out into the world of their organization and drive that alignment during the execution. So these are the change makers. These are the change catalysts. And again, this is a unique skill. Not every leader is a change catalyst. We need to practice it, of course. We need to perfect, or not perfect, but develop our degree of excellence around becoming a catalyst, because at some stage in our career, there's a high probability that we're going to be asked to do this. But even so, not everyone has this as their primary strategic skill set. So there's a very quick introduction to the 4 team roles or functions that make up that strategic team. What were they again? Disruptor, innovator, creative, and catalyst. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into what you should be looking at if you're looking to build a new team and you're looking to put together your strategic management approach and your strategic plans, and then you want to execute on it. Well, there's 4 roles that you should have in place to be able to make sure that you come up with the best strategy and that you can build on it, innovate on it, develop the strategy around it, and then implement, execute, and get the buy-in from everybody. Ensure the alignment is there between the operational day-to-day and that actual strategy that's been put in place. What happens? You break that alignment barrier, or you put a barrier between operations and that strategy. Guess where you end up? One of those 750 companies that have gone bankrupt because the day-to-day is not living the strategy that was identified, and a lot of effort and energy put into identifying the direction for the future is being ignored. And we see this so often. All right. Well, let's now look a little bit deeper, because we've looked at the first 2 elements. We've looked at what is strategic thinking, what are the 6 disciplines that we introduced. We then looked at who do you need in the team to be able to be working through those disciplines. Let's now look at some. There are so many different tools and techniques that you can use and leverage. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to touch on these very briefly, by the way. But let's have a look at some of the tools and techniques available to us for strategic thinking and for other elements. So we use these as part of our analysis process. Now, there'll be some on the screen I'm sure you've heard of. The SWOT analysis, probably the most common, definitely the most widely used around the world. The strengths, the weakness, the opportunities and the threats, the SWOT. There are some people, including Michael Watkins, who suggest that SWOT should be turned around a little bit because it's in the wrong sequence. However, however you use it, it's a great tool. It's stood the test of time. It's used as widely today as it was 20, 40 years ago. It still helps so many companies. Now, what amazes us is we work with so many companies and they use none of these tools. In many cases, they have no strategy, and therefore they've not done any preparation, any analysis, and they are totally at the whim of the direction that is forced on them. So where are they? They're the ones treading the water. They're living in that world of status quo, in pain, fighting for survival to find a solution to that pain, caught up and totally in the trees, can't see anything else because of what's happening around them. So strategy, very important, but doing the analysis helps you to see where you are now. It helps you to see some of those future trends, future challenges, and identify potential solutions. The one beside the SWOT analysis on the bottom middle of the screen with the 5 circles and the light bulb in the middle, that's called the PESTEL model, PESTEL. This looks at your external environment. So the SWOT analysis looks at both internal and external. PESTEL looks primarily at the external. It looks at your environment. It looks at the legal consequences. It looks at the political landscape, the technology, the social atmosphere, as well as the economic. All right. And all of these things are influences. And if we come back to our systemic model, all of these things will influence that systemic model at all those different levels. All right. Then immediately above that, we have Porter's 5 forces. Again, if I was to say which are the most widely used, SWOT, probably followed by PESTEL, possibly followed by Porter's 5 forces and the balanced scorecard, would maybe in many cases provide you the top 4. The balanced scorecard has been around a long time. Porter's 5 forces have been around a long time. Depending on your business, depending on what you want to create and how you want the strategy to evolve, may mean that you'll use more than one of these analysis tools. It may mean that you'll lean on one of those as the primary tool, but then you'll support it with other tools. Personally, I would never just use one. We always try and encourage our customers, our clients, to start maybe with SWOT as an easy warm-up and then incorporate PESTEL. But depending on the business, the balanced scorecard is one that I've used probably since the end of the 80s or beginning of the 90s, maybe. So it's served well as well. You can see when we talk about strategy, we look at internal, external. We look at all those things we spoke about at the very beginning. We look at our customers, our competitors, our suppliers, the market. You'll see illustrations that demonstrate some of that more as we go through today. But there's 4 tools you could use. Probably the one that I personally like the most, because come back to my number 1 Clifton strength, which is being strategic. I therefore like to do a lot of scenario planning. And the application of scenario planning is quite interesting. It's not for everybody. Some people find it too abstract. They find it too removed from their immediate environment. Why I love it so much is because I like to build the scenario and play out typically 3 or 4 different directions that things could go. So for instance, we might say, let's take a company, a manufacturing company, and they're manufacturing, I don't know, whatever they're manufacturing. If we're working with them, they may play out a scenario where in 5 years' time, there's no more, or 10 years' time, the market has shifted to the point where the product, their primary product that they produced through their manufacturing plants is no longer in demand because there's been new products released and those new products have become more popular. And therefore, that particular scenario would highlight one potential outcome. Yeah. We could play one where it's the opposite of that, where we say the demand for that particular product has skyrocketed and we would have to expand tenfold to be able to keep up with the current demand, with the demand that we project. We could say that it somehow meanders along the same pace. And what does that mean? Yeah. Or we could say that we decide to branch out in a different direction. It depends on the situation, depends on what you want to strategize on, but you can have a lot of fun playing with this. Now, when we talk about the horizon that we scenario plan for, it could be 10, 20 years out, depending on how game the team is that we work with, to look that far ahead. Now, one example is Shell. They became very famous for doing that, and they introduced their own methodology actually for scenario planning, and they predicted certain things about the way that the economy would go that nobody else saw. And what we do with these scenarios is, it doesn't mean that they're going to happen, but we're then able to look at probability versus impact. And we can assess, well, if that scenario plays out, what's the impact it's going to have for us? And what's the likelihood that that's going to happen? Yeah, and you can see the diagram on the page, how we would then plot our finding. So let's say we took the one where I introduced that our product may be superseded by a new product that's not in the market yet in the next 10 years, and therefore it's going to have high impact, and we would then determine the likelihood of that, the probability. Now, if it was a high probability, naturally, we're going to have to be thinking about what are we going to do as our reaction. And we don't want to wait for 10 years for it to happen. We're going to start planning and putting in our own solution in place, right? Versus if it was low probability, we say, okay, well, yes, that could happen. If it does, it's going to be a major disruption, but we think it's fairly low probability. So our solution focus for that is going to be different to if it's going to be high probability. Hopefully that makes sense. And that's the fun you can have with scenario planning. It really is a fantastic tool for anybody that likes to do strategizing, who likes to think strategically, not just in the immediate, not just in the short horizon, but looking further afield. And I know there will be a lot of people standing there at the moment saying, yeah, but at the moment, the world is so dynamic. How can we possibly think further than 3-6 months ahead? How can we think 12 months ahead? How can we think 3 years ahead? And you're talking 10, 20 years. Now, yes, these things are big picture items, but you can also look to that, use this model for the shorter term to also help you get some elements. Now, there are many different scenario planning tools out there that you can find. I'm just showing you one example because it's a very simplistic perspective here, but really, really enjoy playing around with that. So there's a quick insight to some of the tools and the techniques that are available to you for strategic analysis. So again, remember what we're talking about is we want you to be able to think strategically. We've given you 6 disciplines. Work on those. How do you work on them in your team? Well, identify what's your role in the team within this strategic process. And if I'm playing the role of disruptor, what tools can I then leverage that's going to support me to be able to? Now, scenario planning is great for disruptors. You probably picked that up. I've told you I'm a disruptor and I love scenario planning. The two are meshed together, all right? But that's just one example, all right? And all the analysis tools out there serve a function. Just work out the role that you're playing in your strategic team, and then you can apply the right tools. All right, with that said, let's have a very, very quick break. I'm looking at the time. We've got about 25 minutes left. So let's not spend too long. Let's just have, instead of 5 minutes, let's just have a 2-minute break. Go and have a bio break, refresh your tea or your coffee, and then come back. And as it says, we've spoken a lot about a lot of theory here, and you can apply it, but try and open your mind for when you come back, because we're now going to be talking about making decisions. And this is really where the rubber meets the road. All the rest of it is in that first phase, right? The preparation phase, where we need to be thinking about and using the tools and doing the hard work, the grind. But now we're coming back and we're going to be talking about decision making and alignment. So get out there, clear the cobwebs out, have a rest, and I'll see you back here in about 2 minutes. All right, well, welcome back. So, as I said, we're going to talk about strategic decision making. Now, one of the things I want to highlight here as we move into decision making is there is a core element that we don't go deep into here. It's strategic planning. Now, of course, the three, thinking, planning, decision making, go hand in hand. So if you look at the diagram on the screen, here's a modified version of what McKinsey and Company use to illustrate the drivers that feed into their strategy. And I like it because it helps give a little bit more clarity around this whole concept, this whole strategic management process. So if you look at the diagram, you can see we have the trends and the insights. We have our scenario planning. We have the competitive analysis. We have the market predictions, another important part of our strategic thinking and our planning, and our decision making. And then we have the three core elements. Now, there could be a fourth one there, which is the alignment, but we'll talk more about that later anyway. And that helps create our strategy. So just be aware of that. I'm not going to go any deeper than that, but just be aware that, that's a nice synopsis of how this all ties together. Now, here's another statistic for you. Comes out of Harvard and one of the studies that they did. It says that those companies that have the capability to plan strategically, to put strategic plans into place, are 12% more profitable than those without. So come back to our team and our creatives and our catalysts. If you have that creative who can put that strategic plan together based on what the disruptors have identified and what the innovators have come up with, and then you have the catalysts that can go out and ensure the alignment during the execution, then there's another incentive. Your profitability is going to go through the roof. All right. So I just wanted to give you that little insight to something that you could keep top of mind as to why are we putting in so much effort to create strategy. Yeah, I'm sure many of you have heard the famous statement by Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, that may well be the case. But for me, that's because the alignment is not done properly. And therefore, we haven't created that culture to implement the strategy. Right. So I hate to disagree with somebody as famous and knowledgeable as Peter Drucker, but that's my version. I'm sticking to it. All right. So with that, let's move on to looking at decision making. Now, I draw your attention first to McKinsey and Company's analysis and other research they did. I think it was about 2017, 16. And it says very clearly that those companies where people involved in the company have the ability to make effective decisions, strategic decisions, outperform their peers, their competitors, 2-1, 2-1 in terms of revenue growth and profitability. Wow. So if you're ever thinking, yeah, I hear this a lot about decision making, why is this so critical? Well, there's just one statistic that should help reinforce why it's so important. So what are we talking about when we talk about strategic decision making? On the screen, you can see 5 areas that help us with understanding what we need to be thinking about and how we can do it. So if we have to make a decision, and by the way, we make decisions every moment, pretty much every moment of our life. All right. Whenever we have a choice, whenever we have a situation, we choose how to react to that situation. Whether it's a earth-shattering decision we have to make, or just a daily routine decision that we're making, we have a choice, and we make a decision based on a whole raft of factors. Now, what we're doing is we're taking that concept and process into the business, and we're saying when we're talking about business decision making based around the strategy, we want to do this in more of a conscious, structured, aware way, all right? Rather than allow our subconscious to continue making a lot of our decisions for us. And how do we do that? Is that we start to look at the process and weigh up alternatives and look at the risk and look at the complexity and the uncertainty, right? And the social issues around it in our decision. Yeah? So if you're working in that strategic team, who are the decision makers? Maybe a good question. So we introduce the team as the strategic thinking element. Well, guess what? Every member of the team is constantly having to decide about something. If I'm the disruptor, I have to decide, is that trend really as I'm thinking it is? Or do I need more information? I need to make a decision. What's the alternatives to that trend? What are the risks? What's the complexity that's on the horizon? Yeah? So I'm going to be using my decision-making skills. If I'm the catalyst, I'm going to be making decisions about how do I go out into the workforce with my political savvy hat on and engage with the middle management to help them really buy into this strategy. What's my decision process? What's the complexity in doing that? What are those uncertain factors or the high risk elements, etc.? So everyone is a decision maker. Now, whether you associate it with strategy or you associate it with another element of the business doesn't really matter. You can apply this same logic. All right? The more important the decision, the more these 5 elements come into play, as well as some of the techniques and tools that we introduce in a moment. All right? So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an awareness. Why decision making? Why is it so important? Well, McKinsey's analysis that they did means you're going to be twice as effective with your revenue growth and your profitability as your competitors. That's a big incentive to start with. Let's have a look at a really interesting tool or way of leveraging and understanding some of the decision-making process. It's called the cone of possibilities. It's been around, gosh, what is it now? 30 years. Came out in 1994, introduced by 2 people, Hancock and Bezold, It was later then revised by Voros, I think around 2 decades ago. So what it essentially says is it looks at potential and then the idea over time. And as you can see, here's an idea, here's a decision we have to make. The potential is that everything beyond this moment with my decision is going to have one of these impacts. So, the decision could lead us down the path of saying it's highly improbable, highly unlikely, it's preposterous. It could be possible, it could be plausible. It could even be something we project. It could be downright probable. And it may even be preferable. So we can use this as a guide as well, not only in the decision, but also in the thinking, in the planning, in everything we're doing. So the cone of possibility is a really nice tool. You can have a lot of fun with it, playing around with it, and really narrowing down some of the decisions that you're going to make. Now, it's not the only tool, of course. There's many other tools out there. If you remember, 2 of the 5 components that we spoke about in the first image were uncertainty and complexity. Well, the top diagram here helps you to use those 2 in a way that helps you make a decision. Right? So, is the item we're talking about factual? And how complex and how uncertain is it? Is it a prediction, a projection, a scenario? Is it something we're exploring, or is it pure speculation? Right? And the further out you go, the higher the uncertainty, but also because of that, the higher the complexity. So in other words, we can make highly theoretical, highly instinctive, or as it says there, something somewhere in the middle. Right? But we have to make a decision. So these just help us look at things from different perspectives and weigh up different odds. So the degree of uncertainty versus the degree of complexity. What's the impact for us in our thinking to be able to decide what we want to do? Another approach is the decision tree method. You can build decision trees, the what if scenarios. So if we go down this path, what's the impact going to be? If we go down this path, what's the impact going to be? Which is the preferred? We can make a decision on that basis. So if this is very probable or even preferable, then what's the implication? Yeah. And you can play out these different scenarios through this decision process. We call it a decision tree. Now, if we want to look at a technique, there's many variations on this, by the way. This is just one model, but we start by identifying as clearly as possible the problem or the decision, getting clarity around the decision we have to make. Yeah. Now, there could be a lot of criteria that we have to weigh up. But first of all, we need to be clear on the situation, the problem, before we can then move forward. Once we're clear, then we establish the criteria that we're going to use in the decision-making process. Yeah? Are we going to measure the degree of complexity against the level of risk and uncertainty, etc.? We have to decide that criteria. And then once we've decided that, we then put a weighting against each of that criteria. Well, yes, we're going to have these 5 criteria that we're going to use in our assessment, but they're not all equally weighted, or maybe they are. Yeah? And therefore, in our calculation, through that weighting, we'll come up with a more educated, accurate decision that we're going to be happy with. Now, in addition to that, we need to establish alternatives. So here's our problem. This is one way we could go, but what else could we think about? How else could we address this issue? Yeah. And then when you come up with, let's say you have one problem and you come up with 2 or 3 other alternatives, let's say you end up with 3 different possible ways of addressing it, then you need to select the one you want to go with, put that into place once you've come up with your plan on how you're going to put it into place, implement it, and then, of course, like we do with everything, you need to be able to evaluate how effective that decision was. Yeah? And then, of course, if you need to tweak the process and the way that you've implemented it, or you may need to go back to the drawing board and say, you know what, that didn't work the way we expected. I think we must have missed something. Let's work through the process again and see if we can come up with something that's going to be more to our liking, something that creates a better outcome, a better result than what this one did. And that happens all the time. So this is not an absolute process. What we're trying to do with strategic decision making, because a lot of the time, the decisions we're making are on something that doesn't exist today. It's something that's coming in the future. All right. And we're not going to be right 100% of the time. So that's why we need to be mindful and always looking and monitoring and ready and agile, have that mental agility to tweak and improve, to stop, pull back. The IT companies, the technology companies have this process down pat in many cases now. So they talk about failing fast, failing forward, and failing in a way that doesn't cripple the business. Yeah. And that's essentially what we look to be able to do through this evaluation. We want to make sure that we make as educated a decision as possible, and we have multiple steps along the way where we try and check, are we still on track? Are we still aligned? Are we still happy? Is it a go, no-go situation? And we keep working our way along the process. So hopefully that gives you some indication about ways you can approach decision making. There's many tools out there. I've only given you a handful just to give you an introduction to the process. But if there was anything I was going to say, be aware of those 5 first, the 5 components that we first introduced, and they're things you need to be thinking about as part of your decision-making process. All right, so let's move on and to the last section. We're a little bit time stretched right now, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but hopefully I've already touched on it a lot as we've gone through our conversation. We're talking now about alignment, strategic alignment. And the alignment is between the strategy that you have developed, planned, so you've thought about it, you've had this whole process that you've put in place, you've gone through, you've identified it, you've created it. Now you're at that catalyst point where you need to go out and make sure that it's implemented. All right. And we need to seek alignment. And this is quite often, as I mentioned earlier, where it breaks down. The senior management spend a lot of time, maybe they go away for a weekend, they go away on a retreat, they come up with this wonderful concept, which may or may not be wonderful, by the way. They put the energy in, they develop it, they say, okay, let's release this to the business now, this is our direction, and the business doesn't buy in. And as a result, we end up with this disconnect. And so when we talk about alignment, what we're talking about is ensuring that we have this alignment throughout each layer within our organization, so that in every area of the business, the operation aligns to the strategic direction. So it means when a team sets their goals, are those goals, if they achieve those goals, are those goals serving the strategy. When a department in the organization sets their 12-month plan, is that 12-month plan aligned with and serving the strategy? Because it cascades all the way through, as I'm sure you're aware. Now, on the screen, what you can see is 5 specific reasons, and each one of these come out of different surveys. So there's been multiple studies and research done over the eons about alignment and the value that it creates or the harm it creates. All right. So here's 5 positives that come out of research that is represented here. So the first one is increased financial performance. You shouldn't be surprised by that. The higher the alignment, the better the performance. All right. So everyone's working towards that same strategic direction. We're all following the intent. We're all day to day doing our bits as part of that big jigsaw, that systemic landscape, but it's feeding the intent. The second is, so it's 10 to 30%, right? Better performance. Operational efficiency is enhanced because the strategic thinking process and the planning considered the resources that we had and the allocation of those resources when the strategy was created. And therefore, if the operation is aligned with that, then the strategy has already taken into account the limitations of the operation. And therefore, it's not creating this stretch, this tug of war between resource allocation. How do you prioritize it, right? It's already aligned. The third one, employee engagement. I'm sure we would all love that. We've all seen the Gallup polls over the years saying one of our biggest issues is employee engagement. Yeah. Well, when people understand what it is they're committing to, that they can see that they're aligned with the bigger picture, that there is a purpose and they have meaning, and that the strategy is what's helping them get to there, then it helps with their engagement. Customers also benefit. All right. So we're not all working on our own little solutions. We're all working on solutions that feed into that strategy, because the strategy is what was identified for the future. Whether we're going to become the disruptor or the disrupted was decided in that strategy. And if we're not taking any notice of it, then there's a great chance that the things we're working on in the operations, if they're disconnected from the strategy, are going to be those things that are disrupted, and all of a sudden we're caught unawares, customers not happy. On the reverse side of that, if we are on the right track, then the customer should be the beneficiary. All right. And then finally, increased agility, flexibility. Because we're all working in the same direction towards the same end result, when we need to pivot, and we will need to pivot from time to time, no strategy is going to be perfect. It's much easier, right? It's like the dog wagging the tail, not the tail wagging and the dog pulling in a different direction. Yeah, the dog's not chasing the tail. So there's many reasons why alignment is something that we should be aiming for. I hope that introduction gives you a little bit of a glimpse about why alignment is equally important to thinking, planning, decision-making, and alignment within part of your strategic management. All right, so with that, we've come to the end of our discussion on strategy. Here's a wrap-up statement, if you like. Understanding the value and the means for establishing sound strategic thinking and decision-making is essential for all leaders to ensure organizational coherence, adaptability, and long-term success. Back to our original statement, we don't want to become one of the bankrupt companies because we had bad strategy. All right. I'm sure if you've ever played in a sports team and the strategy was very clear, we all understood it, we understood the direction, our goals were all aligned, and we became the champion team. We know what that feels like, as opposed to playing in a team who doesn't have that cohesion, who doesn't have that vision. All right. So very important. All right. So let's do a very high level, very quick wrap. Strategic thinking. We gave you 6 disciplines. We also gave you the team, the strategic team, the 4 members of the team. We gave you some analysis tools that you can use. We then spoke about those 5 areas within strategic decision making that you need to put in place or pull from as part of your decision process. Yeah, we showed you some methodology, some techniques you can use to apply that in your decision making. And then finally, we just touched very quickly on strategic alignment, the importance of it. Please ensure that you have that buy-in all the way through the organization. Otherwise, all of this effort with your strategy that your strategic team has gone through is for naught. It means nothing because the tail is wagging the dog. So with that, all that's left for me to say is coming up next month, the month of October, you can see the dates 22nd through to the 25th, 90 minutes each of those days. We have a 4-day ultimate challenge. This particular challenge is related to sales. Now, in the past, we've talked about situational fluency, and we've spoken about it throughout the whole buyer's cycle and the sales cycle. This time round, I'm going to change it up a little bit and bring it back to what I mentioned earlier, if you picked up on it, social selling. So I'm going to incorporate a larger portion on social selling and just identify where it's changed our buyer cycle, where it's changed our sales cycle, and what we need to be, where we need to be and what we need to be doing in order to stay up to date with our approach. So that's coming up end of October, about a month from now. We'll be releasing the registration, the landing page in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. We'll have notices going around. If you want any more information, you can always find it. We do a lot of free material. We have a lot of premium material. If you want to follow us on social media, LinkedIn is where I'm most active, but we are also active on all the other platforms. Go to our website. You can see the link. Now it's the number 4. It's not the word 4. It's coaching4companies.com, the number 4. Our website's got a heap of material on there, a lot of free stuff, a lot of information. Our aim is to help you develop as executives. That's what we're all about. And that's what we produce. Hopefully today's masterclass has been useful for you. Our next masterclass, by the way, just before we wrap, is all about career transitioning. Now, if you've been with us over the last couple of months, you will have seen that we released a new course as part of our ET Academy called Quick Start Your First 100 Days Accelerator Program. It's essentially talking about if you change careers, you change jobs, then that first 90 to 100 days is the all critical, right? Back to Michael Watkins and his 90 days, first 90 days. We talk about the first 100 days. There's a reason for it. We're going to explore that. And the question for you for the masterclass is career transitioning. What's your 100-day strategy? So that's our masterclass coming up last week of December 2024. Look forward to seeing you there, if not before. Up until then, bye for now. Been great having the opportunity to connect with you, and all the best between now and then.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.